Hello all of you out there, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 good Arctames. Not the Arctames which are necessarily my favourites, but ones which are still definitely worth the tame. In at number 10 is the Chalak, and this creature really does get a bad rep, and its tame method is definitely an interesting one, you having to feed this thing beer. But all of that aside, this is actually a really great creature for dealing melee damage, as it is a pretty powerful creature, and its knockback on some of the smaller creatures which you'll find on Arc is absolutely insane. And that knockback is still a very useful ability to have for any creature, and obviously it can throw its rocks around as well. And little creatures actually have a long range ability attached to them, so it is really a convenience that this does have it. And yes, it will probably take some time to learn to actually control this, as it cannot be the easiest to aim. Once you get it right, you have yourself a really good fighting carnivore with some long range abilities, and it really shouldn't be left out of the general mix of what you should be taming. Yes, it's not going to be the best creature out there, but it still will be very worth your while. Next up we have the Achatina. And this is actually a really great creature for farming cementing paste, as they literally create it, and that pretty much is their only use. Their taming method is also very simple, just requiring some sweet vegetable cake, which isn't the most expensive thing, and considering how much cementing paste you can get out of these things, it is definitely worth it. All for that cementing paste, of course, as that is basically the only reason for getting these things. Now, the Mosasaurus isn't my favourite Arctame, of course, which is why it's on this list. These are kind of mediocre to not really mediocre, no, better than mediocre. The Mosasaurus is a good tame. I will definitely say that. It's not my favourites out there. I'll definitely say the Basilosaurus is a much better ocean tame, but this is good tames, not like the best tames. So that's why the Mosasaurus is here. Sorry for my rubbish explanation of it, but essentially this is an underwater creature which is going to pack a lot of damage, and with the X versions on Gen 1 you can have yourself an even better time, and you can even craft a platform saddle for this thing and build a base on the back of it if that's your thing as well. It's just I don't really use the Mosa that much, and when I use it, yes, I definitely enjoy it, but I don't really get any kind of connection through it. Now, the anglerfish is definitely a creature which I think at some point you should tame, and it definitely is worth it for all of that silica pearl farming. I don't know why I couldn't say silica pearl there, but yes, this is the ultimate silica pearl farmer. You don't even need to get off the back of this thing to farm it. You can just, I can't remember what you do, just like attacking. I haven't used this thing in a couple of weeks now, so my mind is oddly ill refreshed. As yes, this isn't the most memorable creature, but it definitely is one which if you get into using, you'll use a lot. It's just I'm playing Extinction at the moment, and you know, these things really aren't going to be any help on Extinction. There's not really any kind of ocean on that map. But yes, if you're in a pinch and you need some silica pearls, the angler is a great shout for a creature. If you haven't tamed one already, definitely tame one. And if you just want to farm some angler gel, that is a great use out of these things as well. If you kill them, you can get angler gel, you can put it in torches, and it has many other uses as well. Now, the Bronto is one of these tames which just has to be mentioned on the list. This creature is one which, albeit, as obviously this list goes, isn't going to be the creature which is going to absolutely change your game and just be the most insane creature you have ever set eyes upon. But it is still a very good harvester of berries, and it even has a platform saddle too, where you can build a base if that's your thing, again like the Mosa. And it does actually deal a reasonable amount of damage, although it probably will take some time. But I did manage to kill that chalk golem. I think they're chalk golems on Vaguero. Not sure. Educate me if I got that wrong. Comment down below what are they called, because I'm not actually quite sure. Yes, the Bronto does lack in mobility, but considering the length of its tail and how many bushes it can gather, this is a really great creature which, if you haven't tamed already, definitely give it a try. In at number 5 is the Rock Golem, and this thing is a really great tame, I will admit, but not one which I am absolutely crazy about. And its taming method is one of huge annoyance, which somewhat does actually deter me from taming this creature, as I really don't want to get out the cannons and a parasaur, because that's the method that I use, or even a rocket launcher and do it that way, as that method is particularly risky. But once I do have one, I do find that I do use it quite a lot for killing deathworms on Scorched Earth, and is obviously really great at doing that. But still, overall, I don't have the greatest fun with using this creature, as it isn't the most mobile out there. I do prefer a more quick and snappy creature over something like this, but I could definitely see if I was more of a PvP player, I'd be loving this thing and I'd be taming it a heck of a lot more. Just for me, it's one of those mediocre tames which really I don't need as a PvE player, but it is still fun to tame a couple of times and just on general occasions. Now we have the Astrocetus, and this creature is definitely one which I'll use from time to time, but its taming method is one which I really just can't get round. But it is definitely one of those creatures which I prefer using than the Golem, and obviously as this list goes on, these are creatures which I prefer more and more, if you haven't figured that out already. So the creature in number 1 is the best of the good creatures, and this is actually just some good fun for transporting things around and just for some general sky combat as well, although this more fits into the PvP space of Arc players. So for me, a PvE Arc player, this isn't going to be the most useful creature to me, but I can still see all of its very valuable use cases in PvP scenarios, and still it is some really good fun to ride around on, mess around with, and deal some heavy damage on creatures with. A good tame. Now, I'm not really an Astrodelphis lover. I don't absolutely crave this creature, but I'll definitely admit it is a good one, and in my opinion, better than the Astrocetus, at least for my use case, as having a fast travel creature is definitely a really good thing to have. It's just I vastly prefer the Tropiognathus if I'm going to use a creature like this which can travel around the map with great speeds, or I will use the Maywing and I will alternate between those two creatures. And I don't really use this thing as its saddle level is too high, and I usually don't really get to that level, although I have on Gen 2. It just is a little bit too much effort for me to actually get one of these things, and the taming method is albeit quite simple, and I do have a guide on it, although not the best as in my YouTube past, which I don't look too fondly upon, but you know, it's still there if you did want to check it out. It isn't actually the simplest of tame methods, and a lot of things can go wrong with it, whereas a Tropiognathus, it is pretty straightforward overall, and yes, not the easiest again, like a simple knockout tame, it definitely is a pretty basic one in my opinion, and I have no trouble with it. But I can definitely agree the Astrodelphis is a great creature, and if you tame one, you're going to have a good time with it. They are just that kind of creature. They are really speedy, fast, and hugely agile. And in at number 2 is the Rhinognatha. And again, this is a creature which, albeit, I can see great use in. And I have used a little bit. I just can't love this creature. And I'm not the biggest fan of it in my opinion. Obviously, that would be my opinion. But I can still see its use case. Just to me, I don't really need this creature for everything. I can make do with some other creatures to transport things around, and yes, the ability to carry Rexes around is useful. I can always just use cryopods, or obviously the Soul Traps mod, to transport those creatures around, and I don't need a creature which can carry those types of creatures. And the tame method is a very long and lengthy process, and on the old version of Arc, these things are extremely rare, making the taming method even harder than it already needs to be. Whereas in ASA, these things just spawn absolutely crazily. They are everywhere in the swamp biomes on the island. It's insane. And obviously the Lost Island isn't in ASA at the moment, so the island's going to be your only bet. But if you do want to tame one, you have to kill a male Rhinoganatha to start and take out that pheromone gland, which will be in their inventory. Tame a Bronto or another creature, which it will accept, and get all those resources, which were on screen about 5 seconds ago. The Bronto is advised, and those resources aren't actually needed, only needed for 100% effectiveness. Then you'll want to trap it or net gun it. Net gunning it is much easier. Pull out a magnifying glass or use the awesome spyglass like I'm using here if you have access to it, obviously. Otherwise, the magnifying glass is your best bet, or you might be able to use the tech binoculars too. And then you want to damage it as much as you can, obviously without killing it. Get its health as low as you can. Obviously, you don't want to kill this thing. That would be really bad, and then you just have to wait for this thing to get out. But before it does, or obviously if you're using a normal trap, you're just going to have to open the trap, feed that pheromone gland to your creature, and then wait outside until, well, actually wait from a safe distance, sorry, and then you might just damage it more if it's needed, and then it will impregnate your dino. That's when those resources are needed in the kind of craving timers. Then at the end of that, your creature will fall over and out will come a baby Rhinoganatha. A lengthy process, but actually quite worth it sometimes. And finally, in at number 1 is the Allosaurus. And this creature, most people will disagree with me by putting this in at the number 1 slot for good tames. It is my favourite tame which I classify as good, but I can't put it into the very good category, as for some reason I just can't like this creature, and I don't know why. I've tried so many times to like this creature, but I just don't like the size of it and all of it. I don't even like the taming method, which is so simple. I don't like the pack separation bit, which isn't even necessary. You can just tame all 3. It's so simple, and I don't really know why. I just can't like this creature, but I just can't really like this creature for whatever reason. And I can admit that it is a really good tame, but for me, it just stays in the good category. And even though it has the bleed ability, good mobility, it has good stamina, good damage, and good health, I don't know. Like I've said so many times, I just really struggle using this thing for some reason. I don't know. I guess I'm just allo incapable or something. But I'll always go with a Carno, and then if I want to go big scale, I'll go with the UT, and I won't go with this creature. I don't know why. I'll go with the UT, and I'll just skip the Allo entirely, and maybe I'll go for a Rex, although I probably won't travel around with that thing as it's not great, and then maybe I'll use the Megalosaurus or the Baryonyx, some much better carnivores in my opinion than the Allo. And it's kind of sad that I don't really like it as much as I thought I would when obviously I was first using the Allo, but I've just never really enjoyed using this creature, and that's just the fact of that. And creatures like the Deinonychus, the Shadowmane, the Baryonyx, the Megalosaurus, the Rex, the UT, the Carno are all creatures which I vastly prefer from the Allo, and that is probably just the way that it's always going to be. First up, we have got ourselves the Quetzal, and this creature in my opinion is one which is extremely underrated, mainly due to its speed, as a lot of people just say, well, it's so slow, I literally can't use this thing. It is the most useless creature out there, and albeit I do admit that its speed is pretty slow for most people's standards, it still is an extremely useful creature for any general task which you may do in any given arc scenario. For PvP players and for PvE players, it works both ways, as you can use these things as great metal gatherers, albeit they don't gather metal, they just transfer metal, so maybe resource transferers. And you can even build a base on the back of this thing as well, which can actually be a pretty OP strat in some PvP situations, although I would probably go with a Raft base over a Quetz base, but definitely for PvE use it is a really cool thing to have, and I don't really get why people don't talk about these things quite as much anymore. Next up, we have got the Carb Enemies, and most people probably just view this creature as a source of keratin, and albeit it is a great source of keratin, if you need keratin, always kill a Carb Enemies. That's just the way you go. Chitin's a lot easier to get from insects, by the way, and you generally get a lot more of it, so I wouldn't generally get keratin for things like saddles, but if you want to have keratin, then you can get keratin from these things. But the thing is, with this creature, it is a great window into the underwater world of Ark, and it's the only real underwater able creature that I'm putting on this list. Like, none of the other creatures here are really great underwater creatures, but maybe apart from the next one actually when I'm thinking about it. But this creature is a really great opening creature into, let's say, ocean exploration, because it's reasonably quick in the water, albeit it's not going to be the fastest, and it spawns on land, so you don't need to go into the ocean, albeit an ichthyosaurus can be obtained pretty easily these days, and, you know, across all time really. But there's loads of traps if you want to do that for an ichthyosaurus. Not really strictly necessary, but they spawn in shallow areas and you can get those. But having a carb in the early stages to get some of that oil gathered in the early stages just really seems to help me out. Next up, we have the Beelzebufo, and this creature has to be here. Come on, the king of cementing paste gathering. And albeit some of you may just say, well, this isn't an underrated creature at all, and it's like the best creature for me pretty much because I can get so much cementing paste with it. A lot of people don't use it, and I used to be one of those people a couple of months ago, and I've switched to this thing now, and I really can't go back. Like, it's so consistent in the way it gathers any kind of cementing paste. There's only really one kind, but you can technically say there's many because there's loads of different ways of getting it. I would usually get it from beaver dams, and quite a lot of Ark players do. It's just really easy, and you could obviously craft it as well, but that is quite slow. Whereas with this thing, you can just kill loads of insects, go into the insect cave on the island, and boom, you can have tens of thousands of cementing paste, and you might actually be encumbered because of all of that. But either way, you can just get so much with this thing. It really has to be on this list, and it is also a pretty good underwater creature as well. You know, it really does have quite a lot of agility underwater, albeit it doesn't pack the most amount of damage. It still is extremely useful, especially in ASA actually now, as insects no longer have levels. In at number 7, we have the Baryonyx, and this creature had to be here in my opinion, and a lot of people are actually moving over to creatures like the Shadowmane now for all of their caving needs, but I really do think the Baryonyx deserves a place on the list, and actually deserves a place in everyone's Ark life for being a great caving creature, albeit the Shadowmane can do a hell of a lot more than the Baryonyx in quite a lot of aspects. The Baryonyx can also do a couple of things which, you know, the Shadowmane can't. The first main advantage actually to this thing is its taming method is so much easier, and you can obviously, because of that, get it much earlier in the game, and also it can stun creatures underwater as well. Albeit, yeah, not the biggest edge over the Shadowmane, I still think it really has a very useful place as a very great caving creature, and I've used these things for years and years now, and albeit, yes, Shadowmanes are great for doing cave runs, I still always come back to this creature. It's just the general basics for me. I know how to use this creature really well and effectively, and I don't really think that I need anything more than a Baryonyx. And albeit a Shadowmane can be very useful and all, but if I think that you don't really need anything more than the Baryonyx, then maybe do you actually need more than the Baryonyx? And this thing is very easily possible. Not to say that it's a bad creature, it's like, oh, well, you don't really need anything more than it. It is still a very great creature, it's just, it's much easier to get your hands on. Next up, we have got the Dimorphodon, and this is a very brief entry, obviously, because the BR for this thing is really short, because there's not too much to say, but they're just really great small pack flying creatures, and they could deal a heck of a lot of damage, especially to players, as they do player-based damage instead of rider-based damage, which can play a huge advantage in a lot of scenarios. And I think people don't give this creature enough credit, and that's why it's on this list. And next up, in the number 5 spot, of course, we have the Carnotaurus, and most people will just be like, well, the Aloe's better. There's nothing more to say, but we're talking about underrated creatures here, and obviously the Aloe isn't really too much of an underrated creature. Yeah, the Rex gets a lot more attention than it, and the Giga gets a lot more attention than the Aloe, but I think the Carno gets even less attention, and especially less attention than this creature actually deserves, as this pretty much my favourite Ark creature. But I'm not going to be so biased and just put my favourite Ark creature right then in number 1 spot, because there are a lot of other Ark creatures which are extremely useful to me, and this is, yes, albeit my favourite, it's still in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be in the #1 spot, as there are some more useful underrated creatures, and my personal and emotional bias, I'm not going to play a huge factor into this video, because, you know, I'm making this for you, I'm not making it for me. If I was making it for me, they'd kind of be right in the #1 spot, but I'm making it for you, so I'm slightly generalising my list here. The reason why I think the Kano is so good, I don't know why it's taken me so long, I've just blabbered on about everything. It deals the bleed ability, it's relatively small compared to things like the Aloe, it does a sizable amount of damage, it's got a good health stat, and it's got good mobility. And albeit its weight isn't perfect, it could definitely be a little bit higher, still is really an ideal creature for me. When I think of a carnivore, I go straight to the Kano, and they're ridiculously easy to tame too, especially in ASA, because you can just kill the parents and then press E on that baby, if obviously there's a baby relative to the parents of the Carnotauruses. Next up, we have got the Megalosaurus, and loads of people really like this creature, and I've heard them in my comments, but when I think of bigger ARC YouTubers and when they do their top 10s, I never really hear this creature being mentioned, unless maybe in an aberration circumstance, and albeit they're really useful then, the nighttime still makes up quite a big proportion of your ARC playtime, especially if you're on Operation, then it's 100% of it. But we're not going to be talking about how great this thing is in Operation, because that's pretty much when this creature gets brought up, all everyone talks about. No, on any map, as soon as it turns into nightfall, this creature is so deadly, and it really does pack a punch, and it can even carry creatures around in its mouth and absolutely tear them to shreds. To actually save me from a huge clan of Microraptors, if that's even a thing. But yeah, they really do pack a punch in terms of the damage department. They will tear things like the Kano to shreds, even things like Rexes and Alphas and all of that, they can just take out with so much ease, and they're such a small, like, versatile carnivore. It really does help them that they have all of this power behind it, as they're very mobile, very easy to use, very easy to control, and actually, frankly, pretty easy to control. Tame, that's what I meant. Did I something. Either way, they're pretty much easy in every aspect. Not as actually so easy to tame in the location they're in, but the actual taming method is very simple. I've kind of gone a bit off here, but you know, it's essentially the Troodon on loads of steroids, and it's so much easier to tame than the Troodon. If the Troodon would never make this list, of course, but yeah, the Megalosaurus is in at number 4. Next up, we have the Velonosaur, and for me, this is just the upgraded Megalosaurus. It deals tons of damage, it can deal range damage, and it's around for all the day. It doesn't just need to be around at night time, albeit the Megalosaurus definitely has its place on this list. The Velonosaur is my preferred creature. And, you know, some people may not agree with that. Do you agree with that? Are you a Velonosaur or a Megalosaurus person? Or a Carnotaurus person? Or a Baryonyx person? Or what's your preferred kind of small carnivore? I know I've done many small carnivore top 10 lists before, but I actually want to know what your favourite small carnivores are. So make sure to comment that down below. And, you know, when I think of the Velonosaur, I really do think of sheer power. And albeit when you level up its melee, its actual turrets don't increase in damage. If you just crank that stamina stat like I just did there, you can fire these things for ages into creatures and just absolutely decimate them. And I had a ridiculously high level theory here. It was in the 1000 somethings, and I didn't force tame a particularly high level Velonosaur, so it is kind of looking like it takes ages in this scenario. And obviously you wouldn't use them at this close of a range, but when you have a good level Velonosaur, you really can take out creatures like it's an FPS game, just straight like that. And that's why I absolutely love this creature. Now, the Crystal Wyvern has to be here on the list, and loads of people talk about the Wyvern just being so great and all of that, and yes, I do think the Wyvern is a great creature. I just don't think it gets no, what am I thinking of? The Crystal Wyvern, sorry, doesn't get a good enough rep as it should, and the normal Wyverns get the reputation that the Crystal Wyverns should be getting as well, as they are kind of the same creature. It's just they don't come in the Wyvern trenches, and they've got another word in front of their name, so they must be worse variants of these creatures, which obviously are the Wyverns, which you'll know from Scorched Earth, as that's the map they released on. But they're far easier to tame than normal Wyverns, and the Blood Crystal Wyvern is my absolute favourite Wyvern. And the Lightning Wyvern doesn't even come close to the coolness and usefulness of the ability you can get out of a Blood Crystal Wyvern. And again, I know I'm saying it again, they're so easy to tame. You just need to be level 65 and have been able to either knock out or kill Crystal Wyvern. I think it's knockout. and then you've got that primal crystal, and then you can simply just passive tame these things, and boom, like that, you have yourself a wyvern. And albeit there's no saddles, so they have no armor, but normal wyverns don't have that either. I really do think these creatures do deserve some consideration in a list of the most underrated creatures in 2024, as hardly anyone seems to talk about these things. And in at number 1, we have got the Bloodstalker, and I had to put this creature here, okay? I really like the Bloodstalker at the moment, and albeit, yes, you can maybe say it isn't the most underrated creature, but for the use that I use it for, I do think it is underrated, and that's why I've chucked it right in the number 1 spot. And as soon as I thought of making this video, this was the first creature that came to mind for me, so I was like, I have to put this thing in at the number 1 spot. It is the greatest water tame, in my opinion, with no comparison whatsoever. And yes, it doesn't have immunity to things like electric eels and jellyfish, but it's so quick, it can get out of there, like, you don't even have to think about it. It's just, it's so agile in the water, it can skim across the top of the water as well, and even if they do get you, it's not going to be the biggest issue. You can get yourself out of there, or you can handily deal the damage to take them all out as well. And they're not just useful in the water like most normal water creatures, which obviously just die if they're not in the water. No, these things can be taken out anywhere and used in all kinds of various situations that aren't in the water as well, and that's what makes this creature so good. And they're just so versatile, but mainly for underwater exploration, underwater travel, and just general underwater things. These are my preferred creature, and they're so good. Underwater caving, underwater getting into underwater bosses. I wouldn't actually bring them into the mode of boss fight. They're not really going to survive there. They're not boss fighting creatures, but for anything that you're already doing underwater apart from the mode of boss fight, these things are really your perfect creatures, and I don't get why people don't talk about these things being such great underwater creatures as much as I do. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below what is the most underrated art creature in 2024, as I want to know your thoughts, and do you agree with this list? And with that, I'll see you all later.